I'm Sam Chrissy Dangermond. I'm a director for academic affairs at the Kansas Board of Regents, and I just want to say we really appreciate all of your being here today. We really appreciate Casey, Melanie, and Kathy, who you will get to know over the course of this session. My colleague, Dr. Jennifer Bonds-Racky, is also on. She and I are going to kick off with about a 20 to 25-minute presentation on policy, fun stuff like that before Casey, Melanie, and Kathy really get you to the meat of this presentation. But we thought it was important to kind of cover some basics about policy first. So Jen, I will have you, if you would, introduce yourself while I pull up our part of the presentation.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Sam. As Sam indicated, my name is Jen Bonds-Racky, and I am an assistant director at the Kansas Board of Regents. I'm sorry, an associate director. Some of you may recognize me from my tenure at Fort Hays State, where I served as department chair and dean for around 10 years, and I later advanced to a provost and president position at St. Martin's University. Following my father's passing, I returned to Hays, and I'm really grateful for my current role at KBOR. It allows me to remain engaged in higher education and focused on student success, and that's really important to me as a first-generation college student. So, as Sam indicated, we're going to cover some of the basics today of policy, so we'll get started. Looking first at the agenda in terms of what our presentation will cover, we'll take a look at grounding our work in English initiatives in the why and link it to KBOR's strategic plan. Then we'll talk about the transition to multiple placement measures. Then we'll wrap up our part of the presentation with a conversation around what is co-requisite support, what's allowed for in policy, and discussing next steps. So let's go ahead and start with the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? And so we'll start our presentation by touching on KBOR's strategic plan, Building a Future, and how this plan intersects with the English initiatives. So Building a Future is KBOR's strategic plan. It grounds our system's work in serving Kansas families and businesses while advancing economic prosperity. This document is designed to be a living document, encouraging strategic adjustments to better support each of the three pillars: family, business, and economic prosperity. What makes it unique nationally is its commitment to promising practices that drive progress. Additionally, the Board of Regents' priorities are closely aligned with the strategic plan. For example, in May of 2023, the board approved changes to the performance agreement funding model, moving to project-based performance funding systems based on implementing proven best practices to drive full implementation of math pathways, system-wide math and English course placement measures, and co-requisite developmental support for math and English gateway courses by fall of 2026. All of these best practices position the system to move the needle on the board's strategic plan. So the English initiatives specifically align with the family area of focus through initiatives driven by affordability, access, and success. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at a few examples that highlight this focused alignment. So how do the English initiatives support this pillar one of affordability, access, and success? First, we can talk about improving access. So when we look at our system-wide data, it shows us that Black and Hispanic students enroll in prerequisite developmental courses at a higher rate and have a lower success rate compared to white students. Replacing these prerequisite with co-requisite support courses removes barriers, improves access to gateway courses, and provides just-in-time support, potentially increasing student success for all students. Next, we can look at successful completion of English Composition 1. So completion of this course contributes to earned credit toward a degree, improves self-efficacy, positively impacts GPA, and supports overall student success. English Composition 1 provides a solid foundation in student writing and communication and serves as a stepping stone for students taking other courses requiring a writing component. Next, higher retention rates. We know students who successfully complete required courses are more likely to remain enrolled and continue their studies. And then grouping the last two together, the increasing on-time graduation rates and reduced costs, students who pass English Comp 1 with co-requisite support on their first attempt are able to avoid additional semesters of non-credit prerequisite hours and are able to build momentum toward degree completion. With the critical skills learned in English Comp 1, students will be more successful in other writing-intensive courses and may avoid having to retake these types of courses, helping with on-time degree completion. Reducing time to degree completion reduces costs for both the students and the institution. And retaining students is also typically more cost-effective than recruiting new students. On the previous slide, we briefly mentioned that implementing the English initiatives can improve on-time graduation rates. So how could this be helpful for students in Kansas? To provide some context, this slide displays the on-time graduation rates for students in Kansas by type of institution. Specifically, the average on-time graduation rate in 2022 was 46.3% for our state universities, 41.4% at community college, and that includes the transfer out rate, and 52.8% at technical colleges. So these numbers demonstrate that we have room for improvement in supporting students to complete their degree requirements on time within our state. Similarly, we can examine retention rates within our state. Retention rates measure the number of first-time students who return and enroll the fall semester of their second year. This slide displays the retention rates for students in Kansas by type of institution. Specifically, the average retention rate in 2022 was 81.4% at our state universities, 61.9% at our community colleges, and 70.4% at our technical colleges. From these slides, we can see how the work of English initiatives intersects and supports our strategic plan in numerous ways. Now we'll take a look at English developmental education in our system up until very recently. So this slide depicts the percentage of students enrolling in and completing developmental education courses, English courses, and English Gateway courses within 2 years. Specifically, look at the latest row of data at the bottom, indicating only about 48% of students enrolling in a developmental English course completed it and the Gateway course successfully within a 2-year time period. Some institutions were offering co-requisite support for English at this time, so it's important to note that this data does not separate out the co-requisite from prerequisite developmental support. And this slide depicts the data for our community colleges. As we advance, we can take a look at the information for our state universities. It is important to note here that at this time, only 2.5% of university students enrolled in developmental education. Of those, only 46.6 completed both the developmental and Gateway courses within a 2-year time period. Now we can shift our focus to the topic of multiple placement measures. So let's get started. Traditionally, higher education institutions have relied heavily on standardized tests to place students into Gateway English and Math courses. While these assessments have their place, relying solely on a single test score offers a limited evaluation. A more holistic approach uses multiple placement measures for course placement. Simply put, multiple measures assessment is a placement practice that uses more than one indicator to assess student success. According to the Center for Analysis of Post-Secondary Readiness, MMA, the multiple measures approach, allows students to take college-level courses if they meet college readiness benchmarks on at least one indicator or through a score that combines multiple indicators. The goal of MMA is to expand access to college-level courses by giving students several ways to demonstrate college readiness. Often, alternative measures include high school GPA, which is proved to be a better predictor of success than a single test score. When we look within the state of Kansas, so if we could advance, thank you. Kansas colleges and universities have also traditionally relied heavily on standardized assessments and operated under a system where each institution independently determined a student's eligibility to enroll in a gateway math or English course. This lack of uniformity resulted in up to 32 different standards across the state's higher education institutions. The absence of a system-wide readiness standard for college math and English has created a missed opportunity for us to clearly communicate expectations to high school teachers, counselors, and students planning on higher education. A system-wide English course placement committee was first convened in July of 2024, and they have met 5 times since then. The committee was charged with developing recommendations for system-wide multiple placement measures for English Composition 1. They are finalizing their recommendations at this point, and they will bring those forward to BASC for review and approval on November 20th. When recommendations are approved by BASC, they will be communicated out to each of the institutions. And then we have one final slide on multiple placement measures. This slide depicts a visual representation of the placement process. Again, the committee was charged with bringing forth recommendations for placement into English Comp 1 without co-requisite support. If the student meets a statewide placement measure or an institutional placement measure, the student is eligible for placement into English Comp 1 without support. If not, the student may enroll in English Comp 1, but will be required to also take the co-requisite support. Either way, the student is still taking the gateway level course during the first semester, learning foundational writing skills integral to higher education and progress towards a credential. And now my colleague Sam will take back over and share some more details on co-requisite support. Sam?
Thanks, Jen. So there are a lot of things in board policy that we want to cover with you guys today, with some important pieces highlighted throughout these slides. The most important piece on this slide is simply how policy defines the Gateway English course, and that is the first college level English course a student enrolls in to meet an English general education requirement. Policy goes on to say that there will be standardized course placement for Gateway Math and Gateway English courses based on the recommendations from those placement committees that were put together. Jen mentioned placement measures just a little bit ago. Again, policy requires that these measures be implemented for both Gateway Math and English courses. The second bullet shows the definition of prerequisite developmental education and stresses that these courses are not to be applied toward certificate or degree requirements, and that also includes elective credit. Policy defines co-requisite support as a support section taken at the same time or in the same semester as the Gateway course to give students extra support and increase the likelihood that they're going to pass that Gateway course. A lot of you have these courses presented as combination courses or supplemental sections already. Students spend extra time in the course and are presented foundational content that they need to grasp the concepts in the Gateway level course. Policy also discusses various aspects of co-requisite support. Sections may be tailored for specific student groups and offered for different amounts of credit, up to 3 semester credit hours. But in this first bullet, don't get this confused with credit toward the degree or credential. Also, in the upcoming slides, we're going to review the models or sections of co-requisite support developmental education recognized by KBOR. Another point to be made on this slide is that tuition and fees can be charged as otherwise authorized for each student's credit-bearing courses, and credit awarded in co-requisite developmental education sections shall not be used to fulfill requirements for associate or baccalaureate degrees or certificates. So just like for prerequisite developmental education courses, because the content isn't necessarily college level, the associated hours cannot be used to fulfill requirements. And again, this includes elective credit. So we're going to start talking about those types of co-requisite support that board policy allows for. And this first one is probably the most common we've seen in the system so far. The supplemental course section, and that is a student in a supplemental course section attends a co-requisite support developmental education section model in which there are structured courses that run before, after, or on opposite days to the gateway course. The gateway course and the concurrent supplemental course are completed in the same semester. The mandatory tutoring section, a student in this section attends a co-requisite support developmental education section model in which mandatory tutoring and a lab is required for a specified number of hours per week. And again, the gateway course and that tutoring are completed in the same semester. Sorry, I didn't have that slide all the way on. So the third type is that boot camp section, and the fourth is the compressed course section. These two types are pretty different. They're probably not recommended for most students who fall into the category of needing support to pass the college level course, but they might work for students in a different situation. For students maybe who had mastered the content at one time, but maybe they've been out of school for a while and they just need a bit of a refresher. So specifically, the boot camp section maybe may have the co-requisite content for the first few weeks of the semester, with the gateway content following the remaining weeks of the semester. But it's a little less time spent on the co-requisite portion than the compressed course section. In the compressed course section, it's about an 8-week divide, where the first 8 weeks are really covering that co-requisite support piece, and the next 8 weeks really focus on the gateway content. So there are many institutional decisions that each institution can make. The selection of any model. Institutions can select from any of the models outlined in policy, and they can select multiple models to best fit the needs of students on their campus. The institution will decide which model and which ways of implementing the models are the most effective. The nature of the courses. Institutions will make many decisions around the nature of the course. For example, with any of the 4 models, the course can be combined or stand alone. Institutions will also need to decide if the assignment and the grades are combined or if those stand alone. The institution makes credit hours decisions. So keep in mind that credit hours related to co-requisite developmental support, again, cannot be applied toward the degree. Beyond this policy, the institutions can make decisions regarding the credit hours associated with the support up to 3 semester credit hours. And finally, tuition and fee decisions. That's something that a lot of folks are wondering about. Tuition and fees can be charged as otherwise authorized for each institution's credit-bearing courses. And faculty assignments, workload, and compensation, those decisions are owned by the institution as well. We know that faculty members in the English department are being called upon to develop the content for the co-requisite support if the institution is not currently offering it. And we know this requires time and, to a certain degree, perhaps a willingness to embrace a new approach to teaching English Comp 1. So in sum, it's a heavy lift, and we encourage institutions to consider how this important work they are called upon to do can be recognized, valued, and compensated. So a few more policy points to touch on. Just a reminder, students who meet either a system-wide course placement measure or an institutional measure should be eligible to enroll in a Gateway English course without developmental support. The student can elect to self-place into that developmental support if they so choose, but the institution can't force them if they meet one of the system-wide measures or an institutional measure. Any student meeting neither a system-wide nor an institutional measure shall be placed into the Gateway course with developmental support. And finally, the part of this slide we want to get across is that all aspects of the policy shall take effect at the beginning of the fall 2026 semester and shall apply thereafter. If an institution does not comply with any aspects of this policy, there will likely be funding implications. Just a couple more things to touch on before we hand it over to the experts. I wanted to we wanted to share with you the members of the English Course Placement Committee. They worked really hard. Again, it took them about 5 meetings, but they came to agreement upon some system-wide course placement measures. Again, those will be reviewed by BASC on November 20. And upon BASC approval, those decisions will be shared out with the system, with institutions throughout the state. And finally, this is a look at all the activities associated with your institution's performance agreement with the board. The main thing to get across is, yes, right now, this year, we have professional development sessions underway. Obviously, today marks the kickoff of the English professional development sessions. Next year, by next fall of 2025, institutions are expected to offer at least one section of the co-requisite support for English Comp 1 and should employ those system-wide course placement measures to place students into that section. And by fall of 26, we expect a full-scale implementation. So we might have a minute or two for questions at this point. What we don't get to, we will try to take up and record. You can put your questions in the chat, and we will try to answer those in writing and get them posted to the website as needed. And I'm going to peek at the chat and see what we've got so far. Jen, have you vetted any of these yet?
Yeah, Sam, I think there's two that would be really great for you to address. The first one is, so must the co-rec be labeled a 0XX course if the chosen model is a course, or is that numbering system a suggestion rather than a rule regarding how you number the non-credit courses?
Let's call it a strong suggestion. If you're a state university, you must adhere to our policy on course numbering, and that is those courses that are not college level not college level content should be starting with a 0. And we would strongly encourage the 2-year institutions to follow that.
And then one more, Sam, and I've answered it in the chat, but if we could elaborate, that would probably be great. It's a really good question about, can institutions establish minimum placement requirements for enrolling in a co-requisite course? And so I answered that. If you have an admitted student to your institution, you can't prevent them from enrolling in the co-requisite section. You can certainly set maybe minimum where you want to do deep advising or have extensive conversations or consider other alternatives through adult education, but you couldn't prevent them from taking the co-requisite course along with the gateway course. Sam, would you like to add to that?
Actually, I think you answer it quite well. I have nothing else to add.
And then we just received one more question, and it might be covered later on today. So maybe we can give you, or will it, Casey? I saw you nod your head. We can just wait if it will be.
Oh, yeah, no, I think the specific populations, that one,
Yes.
absolutely is a
Okay.
possibility. Yeah.
All right. So we'll just wait and let you guys talk about that one later on.
Great.
That's it, Sam.
Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and transition in just a moment to our other folks. From the administrative side of things to the information that we think that faculty are really here to listen to today. I'm going to introduce Dr. Melanie Burdick, professor and chair of the English department at Washburn University. Not only is she helping to provide excellent content for this professional development series, but she also co-chaired the English Course Placement Measures Committee that just completed its work, along with Stephanie Joyner of Barton Community College. So Dr. Burdick, I'm handing the reins over to you, and I will pull up your presentation.
Thank you, Sam and Jen. And I see in the chat, there's a question about, will the slides be shared? And yes, they will be. And we also have some handouts and other things. We'll be sharing all of that. And this will be recorded. So there will be lots of opportunity to get to this content. While we're waiting for the slides to come up, I'm Melanie Burdick and I'm at Washburn University. I'm going to let my co-facilitators introduce themselves. Casey, will you go first, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Casey Reed. I am Associate Director of Writing and Learning Support at University of Kansas, with a history of over 20 years of doing this fun stuff. 9 institutions in 4 states and multiple hacks at this co-rec work. So I'm really excited to be with you all today. Kathy, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Kathy McCoskey. I'm at Butler Community College. My office is in El Dorado, Kansas, and I'm with the English department. I'm English professor, and I'm the lead for developmental education here at Butler. And so part of that is overseeing the ALP program, which is our co-requisite program.
Thanks, Casey and Kathy. And they're going to be jumping in here in a little bit. I want to just give you all a little bit of an overview. Casey, Kathy, and I all have experience at our institutions or past institutions with co-requisite models of writing, and we are fully on board with this. We're excited that this is happening in Kansas. And so we're going to share with y'all some of our experiences and some of the research, but we know that some of the folks here have their own experiences, and we hope that you'll feel comfortable sharing what your experience is as well. We're also, I want you to know that we're very conscious of your time and that it's a Friday afternoon. And I heard someone say this week, whoever put daylight savings, Halloween, and the election within 1 week of each other was just, we need to find that person and tell them a thing or two. But we know that it's been a week for everybody probably. And so we have built in some things that we hope will be valuable to you. We're not just going to talk at you for 2 hours. Could you forward the slides, please? So that you know what's happening coming up today, we're just talking about the overview of co-requisite English and some of the different models and some of the research that's behind all of this. And then next semester, we're going to kind of dig down on the 31st and the 28th, January 31st and February 28th. We're going to delve into some of the important pieces of co-requisite writing instruction. And then finally in April, we're hoping that this will be a real interactive session where there will be time for your folks at your institution to work together and have their questions answered to start thinking about implementation. So I wanted to just make sure you knew what was coming up. And then what to expect for the rest of the presentation that Casey and Kathy and I will be doing. We would love for you to participate as actively as you are comfortable with your cameras on or off. We love seeing your faces, but we also know that the slides are taking up a big block of the screen probably for you. We would love for you to participate in the chat, use the gestures. We're going to be sharing information, but we are going to be occasionally asking you to also participate by sharing a short response. We're not going to do breakout rooms, but we are going to have some participatory activities involved, and we are going to have a 10-minute break about halfway through. So just wanted to make sure that you're aware of all that. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, and I should also mention that we are going to have a Q&A session at the end. So please, if you have some questions that don't get answered throughout the time that we're together, we will have some time at the end. I do see there's a question in the chat, and I don't know if
And I addressed Peter's questions with a thumbs up. We will definitely get to those topics and I'll work some of them in. And then Mary Jo's question, I think, might be more relevant for Sam and Jen to jump on.
Sorry, why don't we hold those until the very end? I want to be sure we get through your content. And as I indicated, we will be answering all the questions in the chat, if not verbally by the end of this presentation, through writing, and we will post those answers on our website.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we would like for you to help us know more about your own experiences. I've put a link in the chat. If you could open that, that should take you to a shared document. And it's a chart that says KWL, and this might be an activity that some of you already do in your own classes, but it's a nice way to do a quick assessment of where folks are. So in the K column, please jot down 1 or 2 things that you might already know about co-requisite writing instruction. If somebody writes something down that you know as well, put an asterisk next to it. And then under the column with the W, want to know, put down your questions. And again, if somebody has a question that you also have, please put an asterisk next to that. So I'm going to give everybody about 5 minutes to work on that chart, and that will help us get a feel for what you already understand and what questions you have. It looks like we know a lot and we have a lot of questions. And I also see that some of the questions we probably are going to be answering, especially I see questions about reading and scaffolding and how do you arrange the curriculum in the different sections. Those will certainly be taking place in some of the spring sessions that we do in January and February, where we drill down into more curricular and pedagogical issues. Kathy and Casey, do you see anything else that you want to comment on?
No, and I
No,
will
I'm just
say-
really, oh, go ahead. I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Kathy.
I'm just really excited to see what people are bringing to the table and the questions.
Yeah, one of the things we have talked about for spring, just as sort of a preview, is during those workshops, collecting up ideas from folks so that we can all kind of share out and have a shared sort of, way to look at what everyone's doing as everyone's putting this together. So I think that'll be exciting. And then we'll also make sure that we're sharing some resources today that can help address some of these things ahead of time if you decide that you want to start thinking about some of these things.
I do see a question about placement, and we are going to have consistent placement measures across institutions. So that is going to be something that is still working its way through KBOR, but that will be, I don't know, Sam, when that might be announced to everybody, what those placement measures are.
Basque will be reviewing those placement measures at the November 20 meeting.
Okay.
So if they are approved at that meeting, we should be able to communicate out to the institutions pretty quickly thereafter.
Okay, so you can keep this open and add to it as we move through our presentation, adding questions. I love seeing it looks like there is quite a bit of experience here, but there's also a lot of questions. So we hope to address those, if not today, as some of the sessions coming up in the spring semester. Let's see, let's go ahead and forward the slide, please. But you can also be adding to the chart under the L, learned. So as you're learning things that are answering some of those questions, you might want to add to that as well. And other questions that come up. So today's objectives. First, you're going to learn a short background about the co-requisite movement within English and writing studies. So this is something that's been happening in different ways across the country in different models. And so Casey will be talking about that. And then Kathy's going to talk about the ALP model and how that's been implemented at Butler Community College, so that you'll get to see a snapshot of an implementation in one particular context. And then we plan to end with an overview of more decision-making points for implementation that you can sort of ponder a little bit before we come back together in January. All right.
So I'm going to take over and talk a little background. And I noticed your comments, and we'll make sure to make a note of that and make sure that we can bring that up in
Thank
some of
you.
the sessions in the spring.
Casey, I'll
That's
go
great.
ahead and
Thank you.
cut and paste that into the chart for her. I can do that.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Fabulous.
Melanie.
Thank you all. Next slide, please. Oh, perfect. Great timing. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of sort of the political background of what happened to bring CoRex to the front. I think that can be useful sometimes to understand where we've come from and how we got here. So the 1990s really set the stage for a major shift in how what we in composition and rhetoric or writing studies call basic writing, and what other folks might call developmental education. As open admissions was ended at the City University of New York, and states passed a lot of legislation that moved developmental education out of four-year institutions and shoved it into two-year institutions. So there are a lot of states who actually have policies on the books still, where four-year institutions are not allowed to provide developmental education. In 2009, things shifted in some different directions, though. Lumina Foundation had a new president, and that president of Lumina sent a rather compelling letter to an incoming president, Barack Obama, who was trying to figure out his educational priorities at the time. And specifically, our Lumina Foundation folks shared an ideal of having a 60% college completion goal for the country. And that set us off to where we are today. So that college completion agenda was born, and as the slide goes over, a few different things happened at that point. So the National Governors Association adopted Complete College America's college completion metrics, and co-requisite support became one of Complete College America's game changers, as they used to call them, core strategies that proposed ways to decrease what was oftentimes talked about as remediation. And they brought Peter Adams' work in from Community College of Baltimore County. And so many of you are familiar with that work as the Accelerated Learning Project, ALP. And that has really swept the college completion agenda. Next slide, please. And so immediately after, from 2010 to 2012, we saw 17 states become fast early adopters of CCA's agenda, including states like Connecticut and Missouri, that quickly passed legislation to reduce remediation. And that's where I started getting involved with this kind of work when I was in Missouri. The White House also hosted multiple summits about community colleges in particular, and remediation being identified as a reason for low completion. And then that spurred additional states and federal attention on overhauling and reforming developmental education, leading to a wave of legislation across the country that ushered in very similar mandates to what we're working with here in Kansas. Next slide, please. So I want to sort of do a little pulse check. I'm curious. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide if people are already feeling informed, but our field, even before these mandates, was already coming up with a lot of different ways that they were doing something different, basically, with their developmental education or basic writing courses. If you are interested in a quick overview of these approaches, would you please either use your react button in Zoom to put up a reaction, or use chat to put up a little reaction for us? Again, if you're interested in a short overview of these approaches, please give us a little reaction. And if we don't get very many people, that's okay. I just want to make sure we spend our time where you want to spend time. So far, we're split. So if I could get a couple more responses to help break the tie, that would be great. If you're interested in hearing a quick overview, and I'll just say them out loud while we're doing that. So boot camps and summer bridge programs, a lot of this work was, and early on, it was done in Texas. But that is spread and is done in other places. Stretch programs, studio programs, accelerated models like Co-Rex, other mainstreaming models, integrated reading and writing models, which again preceded the ALP and Co-Rec movement, but have become part of the ALP and Co-Rec movement, and then embedded support. Okay. It looks like so far most people are feeling up to speed. So that's great. There are references there, and we'll have references in one of our handouts if folks want to look into those more. And I'm also happy to talk offline. So let's go ahead and go to our next slide, please. Great. So quick review for all of you, because it sounds like folks know. Today we're going to focus mostly on the ALP model, in large part because it has been taken up so extensively, is already in use according to the surveys that were filled out before we did this at many of your institutions, and is one of the models that best meets KBOR's criteria for English co-requisite approaches. As has already been noted, ALP was developed by Peter Adams, and others at a community college of Baltimore County as a co-requisite approach to basic or developmental writing where students are mainstreamed. ALP has been studied extensively by Community College Research Center and others. Next slide, please. So some of our guiding principles for our ALP approaches are that students that co-enroll in the college level class and the support class in the same semester. The goal is to support students in achieving the college level course outcomes. The support class typically provides just-in-time instruction that is synced with and then backwards designed from the college level class, often pre-teaching difficult concepts. It includes more time for reading, student success curriculum, sentence level considerations, and writing process. It incorporates additional academic and non-academic support as needed. And in a few minutes, Kathy will discuss what these guiding principles look like in practice. And in our spring workshops, we'll get into more detail about how to implement these guiding principles. For now, we just wanted to give an overview of what research suggests about the impact of co-requisite courses on various facets of the student experience. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of research-supported features of course structure. Denley's analysis of Tennessee's statewide implementation of 13 community colleges and of Georgia's 26 public colleges and universities, and so we're looking at like 26,000 enrollments, finds there's a strong and statistically significant difference in outcomes and co-requisites when the same instructor is used for the co-requisite course and the first-year writing class. All students in the first-year writing class are also in the co-rec, and the co-rec is 2 credit hours instead of 1. And I know these days the ALP model that comes out of CCBC specifically is using 3. So, but this particular analysis was comparing 1 credit hour to 2. So you all have been sitting for a minute. We want to give you all a break. We're going to take a 10-minute break, but do not flee, everyone. The best is yet to come. Kathy is going to be coming up shortly after the break. We're going to have a couple more activities, but she'll be sharing more about her extensive experience at Butler Community College. So it's 2:47 right now. Let's try to plan to be back in around 2:57 to 3. Thanks, everyone. And I'm happy to take questions while we're breaking. everyone. We're slowly coming back. No rush. I just want to note the good conversation going on in the chat. That's part of what we were hoping we might start getting going. So I appreciate that you're starting to think already and talk in terms of logistics, really, because there's a lot to consider. And for folks who have a little bit more planning to do on this, there's a lot to learn from those of you who have been doing this a little bit longer. So I appreciate the comment about the 3-3 seeming to work well for folks at a couple of different institutions. Do you go by Thomas or Tom? Either way. And then also from Mary. And then, oh, go ahead, jump in.
I tell my students, as long as it's not an expletive, I'll answer to it. So Thomas is fine.
That's really helpful, and helpful to also be thinking about room and scheduling, because that does make a difference on the student experience and having things in the same spot. We'll talk about this more later, but I'll go ahead and reshare this document that has some implementation considerations in it, as well as a bunch of resources. So thanks, Veronica, for saying that. Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm going to very quickly go over a couple of the bigger findings that we have now after 20 states and 30 plus years of COREX. I think this information is important, in part because it helps us know what COREX can do in terms of some of the things that Sam and Jen were talking about some of the reasons why KBOR wants us to prioritize this work. And then some of the findings that are also coming up where there's other things to think about in terms of what we need to do to address some of the longer term down the road issues for students in their experience. So just want to go ahead and get into our next slide, please. So some selected benefits, I think you all know this pretty well. We know at this point, and I don't say that often and lightly without saying we think, we're pretty sure, right? We see increased pass rates in our classes. So higher numbers of students, understood that oftentimes our comparisons are based on the number of students who would have originally started in a prereq class, and the fact that we lose some of them when they stop out between semesters, and the fact that a larger percentage of students are successfully earning A's, B's, and C's because the majority of our courses are prereq courses, right? So some pretty significant differences at places like CCBC, where we see this huge difference in pass rates, and it's been very significant across Tennessee and many of the other states where they have been implementing COREX at wide scale. And this includes when we disaggregate for, I know Jen talked earlier about some of the rationale for this being that we want to do a better job for our Black students and our Hispanic students. And we see similar kinds of gains for different student populations, and different research has talked about that. Next slide, please. So Rand and Lee have done some of the most systematic look at co-requisites and have really focused on the 10 years of data coming out of Tennessee. And then just to reiterate, the 13 institutions that have been implementing that. And like Adams and many others, they have found short-term gains, specifically for students who are on the cusp of placing into college level classes. Specifically, multiple studies show co-requisites improve, sometimes significantly, the completion of first-year math and English classes when compared with students who might have otherwise taken standalone developmental education courses. Additionally, students report that co-requisites improve their course understanding and engagement. So this was a survey done to get more responses from students about their impressions. And then some research also suggests some decreases in attrition rates and increases in semester to semester retention I will say my experience with that is it's highly institution specific. And so when it comes to whether or not retention rates are actually impacted, there's a lot more variety in terms of the research and in terms of different institutions. Next slide, please. That said, it has already been alluded to in chat. The short-term gains in course pass rates and semester to semester retention wash out within 3 years and can correlate with lower placing students dropping out altogether. So we have some things to think about. As Community College Research Center researchers Jagers and Bickerstaff noted as early as 2018. So I want to note, while we do have a lot more studies have been coming out about this in the last 2 years. We've had research about this. I've been seeing it for at least 6 years. That co-requisites are just unlikely to substantially improve graduation rates. This information is something we want to provide because we have to be realistic about what co-requisites have been able to do thus far, and be mindful about how we set them up, knowing their longer term limitations, especially for lower placing students in two-year colleges. So when I started seeing this research coming out, I will admit I found it depressing. Having spent my career on these kinds of initiatives, it was a little hard to feel like they weren't having that longer term impact. But what I quickly saw was that the thing is we have overhauled what we're doing in our first year classes in English and math in a way that needs to be replicated across our institutions. And so I know that there was earlier a mention and question about, and I'm noting that Peter, I think you might have asked about, was it Peter? Anyway, sorry, I'm going back through all the chats. About, why aren't, how about doing something like this with some of our others, what are often known as gateway courses? And I'd say, yes, that's actually been my push at a lot of institutions. And that is work that's been done at some other institutions as well, that we really need to touch on. There's other classes that also need to be reconsidered in terms of how we're teaching them, how we're thinking about reading and student success. All those kinds of things. So I just think of it as we have been the start of overhauling what's happening at our institutions, and hopefully we can see where this work goes and continues to spread out beyond our first year classes. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this off with the next slide back to Melanie so that we can do an activity.
Thanks, Casey. So Casey just shared a lot of really important research and some context as to why we're doing this. And I wanted to bring us back to thinking about our students. So what I'd like for you to do is think about the students who have been placed into remedial composition classes at your institution. And if you could, not just like as a group, but maybe think about one particular student. And kind of picture them and think about them carefully. If you don't work with remedial composition classes at your institution or co-requisite, maybe think about the students who have been in your writing classes that you felt might have needed a little more support, and think about one of those students. All right, next bullet, please. Thank you. Now what I want you to do is think about what are some of the strengths that they bring to your classroom and your institution? I'm thinking about one student that I have in class right now, and I'm going to use a fake name, but Caleb comes into my class and sits right in the front. I'm sure somebody told him that strong students sit in the front row. And he raises his hand and answers almost every question if nobody else is willing to speak. And he's missed one class all semester. His writing skills are not that great. We're working on it, but he is so excited to be in college, and he has the most amazing interpersonal skills. He'll when we are in small groups, he draws out, even the quietest students and gets them to talk to him. And his positive energy and his excitement is just, it just spreads around the classroom. So he's somebody I'm thinking about. Could you go to the next bullet, please, Sam? So think about a student that you have and some of the strengths that they bring to your classroom, and just type some of those strengths in the chat. Let's think about our students right now. Yep. With some of them, don't we wish they all had perfect attendance? I love curious and respectful. Yeah, persistent. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Lots of real world experience that we can build on. I love courage, Veronica. I love that one. I think a lot of students are bringing courage to the classroom. Yeah, you guys got it. Awesome. Thank you. This is very inspiring for me to read. And I think it's just awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And if you want to continue to share some, let's go to the next slide, please. So I know I'm speaking to the choir. I know you guys get this, but I just want to always remind us, or remind everybody here, I need to remind myself sometimes, is that for this sort of instruction and the co-requisite model, we need to really hold an assets-based, we have to hold an assets-based model in our heads. We have to have that vision. We have to have that lens as we're looking at our students. And that's really hard to do because I think we've been trained to work from this deficits-based model where we test students or we assess them and we see what they're missing and then we try to fix that. Instead of thinking real carefully about what are they bringing, how can I build on that? How can I take them in another direction? And how can we leverage those assets in our classrooms? So I just wanted, we wanted to take a little bit of time to get back to thinking about those students before Kathy is now going to tell us about some specific implementation decisions that were made at Butler Community College.
Yes, thank you, Melanie and everyone. So at Butler, this is how our journey began. I believe it was in 2012 when I was at a then NAID conference. Of course, that's now called NOS. And I heard Peter Adams speak about his OUT program. And it really made me think about what our existing DevEd program was like. And it just was so different from what even how we've been thinking about DevEd. And then I became more aware of all the research that was coming out and all the action and just all the work that was being done at each state and how DevEd seemed to be almost imploding in a way. So that got my attention. And then in turn, I got that information to my dean, Susan Bradley, who she said, let's try it. And so this is how our pipeline looked. Peter Adams is always talking about this as a pipeline, and I think that makes perfect sense. So we had 2 DevEd courses. We had English 052, sentence and paragraph, and we had English 060, fundamentals of English, which we just still have, and then Comp 1 and Comp 2. So we had 4 semesters, and I have to tell you, English 052 was a course that at one point in my career I created. I thought I was doing the right thing, right? It was sentence to paragraph and that thinking of they need more of this, right? But so his research really opened my eyes to that. And especially seeing how students leak out between the levels, even people who succeed in the English 052 and English 060 courses, for example, even if they pass, a large group of them don't come back. And so really the pass rate or the continuing rate between 052 and English 101 was just abysmal. So we measured that. It was shocking. That was some years before 2012. So we knew we had a problem. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick look at the timeline at Butler. And I share this just because I think it could be helpful to you. So first we started with a pilot of just 2 sections, and my colleague Corey Tubner, who's on, was another one who did the pilot with me. Peter Adams came to campus. So at that point he was, still very active in his career, and we were fortunate to have him come and do training with us, also with administrators and with our advisors. So it was very thorough. And then we started just to scale up. So fall 2013, we had 4 sections. And then where we scaled up, what we call our scale up would be 2016, where we had 35 sections, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So we had the most instructors at that point that were trained. We went through a rigorous training and created something called the ALP Community of Practice. Also in 2016 is when our online ALP began. So we've been doing that for quite a while. And a big change in our placement at that time was that at that point, we didn't keep any dev ed developmental education students from entering the co-requisite, which now seems just like, well, of course, why would you? But at that time, we, for a while, we kept like low readers or low writers of a certain level with Accuplacer or Compass, or I can't remember what a placement we were using at that point right off. But and then we let them all in. So the idea was this will work for everybody, even if you're low. Fall 2018 is when we started using what we're now calling alternative placement measures at Butler, because we really use that more as a single measure. They don't have to prove other things. If they come in with a certain GPA, cumulative unweighted GPA of 3.0, then they can go straight into Comp 1 without developmental English or co-rec. Consistently, it's been 75% of those people who come in with the GPA pass English with a C or better. And then finally, where we are at now with fall 2024, we are continuing to do face-to-face ALP, online ALP, and then Corey and I are trying some blended sections, which I can address at this session or another time. And we're also going to be offering ALP for the summer for the first time, which is trickier because of that 8 weeks. So next slide, please. So you can go ahead and put all the bullets up there, Sam. I didn't realize it was like that. Okay, so this is how ALP works at Butler. So we have the classic accelerated learning program setup that Peter Adams shared with us. So our fundamentals of English class is 3 credits. Of course, it's non-credit, but it counts towards financial aid and or their class load, plus English 101. And so that's 6-credit program. We have 12 students max English 060 and 25 in the EG 101. And the 25 students are made up of 12 ALP students plus 13 non-ALP students. So we have that mix of students, which is really important. It's really a valuable asset in the ALP classroom. It's taught by the same professor. And in the face-to-face classes, those are back-to-back. So students will leave one classroom and usually move to another smaller classroom with the same teacher with a short break in between. And we are using OER texts in all of our English classes almost. I think we just have maybe one more class to accomplish that in, but we certainly do that in all of our comp in fundamentals classes. So that's what we're using for textbook. Although ALP instructors are have a choice to pick from a nonfiction book list that we've developed and continue to develop over the years, and they might want to use that as an extra book. Next slide, please. So this is how we set up our courses in Banner. It's certainly not perfect, but this is what's worked for 14 years. We're still looking for other ways to do it that's not quite so cumbersome, but I think it's helpful to see. So you see 3 different CRNs, course record numbers. The first one is the non-ALP students, and we've got them when they're meeting in the classroom. And then the second one is the ALP section, same time, same room, and that's 12 ALP students. And then the blue one is our fundamentals class, which is meeting right after that in a different classroom with those same 12 students. So how we've done that at Butler, we've made it work, but it's still a pretty manual process for the ALP sections. And so those two, the 9246, for example, and then the EG060 underneath it, are zeroed out during enrollment. And so advisors place students in that manually. And then our lead DevEd advisor checks the list often to see if those are the same students are in both, if enrollment's going correctly. So there's a sheet of class sections that's given to advising before the semester starts, and then we continue to update that as anything changes with our instructors or if anything gets canceled or added, along with a list of reminders about how ALP works. So should I pause here for some questions, Casey? How's that going?
Yeah, we did have, that's a good idea. Corey asked, students don't burn out after 3 hours?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, that's a good reason that we're trying blended. I can just quickly explain blended if that's okay. So how we're doing it, of course, there's lots of ways to cut this stuff up, but how Corey Tubner and I are handling that this semester is we have students in English 101 come, for example, Monday and Wednesday for their regular English class, like this we see on the slide, 9:30 to 10:55. And then the English 060 students, we call those our ALPers, that group of students, just comes on Monday from 11 to 12:30. And then the Wednesday class doesn't meet physically, it's blended content online, it's in Canvas. And so we're piloting that, we're going to do it again in the spring. And it does help with how restless they get in that long stretch of time. It has its pluses and minuses that we're still working on. So I can go into that more now if people would like, or we can keep moving. Okay, next slide, please.
I think I want to say one other thing real quick, Kathy, is that
Yes.
the developmental section, that's the supportive section, it doesn't have to be 3 credit hours. So that is up to each institution, I believe, how they want to handle that.
Yes. Yeah. We have thought about moving ours down to 2 credits, but for all the work and everything that would take, we thought it would be better just to try blended and see if that worked. Okay, so through our ALP community of practice, which is all our instructors who are trained to be in ALP, which is not all the English department, we've developed what our tenets of that program are. And over the years, we've added and tweaked these, but this is what we have right now. So backward design from English 101 and 102, curriculum scaffolding, high challenge and high support, attention to non-cognitive and affective issues, including an emphasis on belonging, using the reading cycle, critical thinking, and active learning. And I'm going to address each one of those in the next slides. So next slide, please. So first of all, we have backward design and scaffolding. So your backward design, you know, is thinking about where are we going with this, right? Which just makes sense. But I know I've had many years of my instruction before this that I didn't think about everything in my class fitting with what comes ahead, right? So with ALP, with co-requisites, you want to think about having everything in what you're presenting in 101 or in 060, everything fit together well, and also to be leading towards the goal of 101 skills and mastery, and also 102, right? So it's really cutting out anything that's extra, which students appreciate, just really trying to fine tune that. But scaffolding, if you think about scaffolding, scaffolding is around something else that's being built. And so the scaffolding is built, really could be built at the same time as the thing in the middle, the building. And so that's how we work with curriculum in the ALP classroom. So this is just a snapshot of what could happen in 2 weeks in those two courses. For example, in English 101, the first week, I start to talk about where I address what I'd call the writing process. And I have a video that I use in my online classes too, that my students watch. In my lecture class, I would probably go over that in person, but just to start talking about the process of writing. So that helps my ALP students in 060 be ready to start writing and using that process right away. In the fundamentals class in the first week, I start them writing in what we call a short writing A, which I'm using Peter Adams' labels for those. And so whatever my short writing A is, I'm getting started right away with writing, where in my second week of English 101 is when I'm starting actually having them process and get going into an essay. So in English fundamentals of English rather, we are getting ahead of what we're doing in English 101. So we're working ahead. So you can see in week 2, I'm getting them into the quoting basics, how to do quoting. Well, I use a illustration I call ice cream sandwich. And so they learn that way before the English 101 students do. So they're starting to try that and practice that. They're also already rough drafting something, where in English 101, we're not going to start doing that till week 3. So it's not pretty. The short writing A isn't very pretty, but it gets them started with writing. And I think we'd all agree that practice is really what matters, right? It also gets them more comfortable and builds their confidence. So that in a snapshot is what scaffolding is. Is there any questions specifically about that I could address? Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this is a transition into what we talked about in our tenets about addressing affective and non-cognitive things. So a big emphasis in ALP is being aware of the individual student's needs. So building trust, communication, and a relationship. And we have more time with those students. And so that's easier to do, but it also takes, I feel like, a special kind of instructor. So let's go to the next slide. And Sam, this is the one. The question is, why do people not succeed and why do people drop out of DevEd? And if you could just keep going, Sam, until it says final thing. There we go. Right? It's not usually because they can't write a thesis, or they don't know how to use examples, or they hate MLA format. It's not usually those things, right? It's actually, let's go to the next slide. Yes. Yeah, keep going. Thank you. All right, so we see life happens, life issues, and one more click. Oh, more than one quick click. There we go. So, and then next slide, please. So I think we would agree that what gets to our DevEd students and really a lot of our students, not just them, would be life issues and affective issues, which would be those psychological, emotional, social issues. And altogether, we call those non-cognitive. So a lot of what we're doing in the ALP classroom is building relationships so that students can feel comfortable sharing barriers with the instructor and getting help, finding resources, or just being that listening ear. And let's go to the next slide. So the Co-Requisite program is really built to support students in those ways. I'm taking some of these from a slide from Katie Hearn from California Acceleration Project, the ones with the asterisks. And like I said before, establishing and maintaining a positive supportive relationship between the students and the instructor and the students really helps a lot with those non-cognitive issues. Certainly doesn't take them away, but it gives that support and creates a sense of belonging in a classroom and in the bigger English 101 classroom. Also, providing class time for students to process content and practice skills helps with that because the classroom is a place where they can build their confidence. Also, intervening when students show signs of struggle or disengagement. I think as instructors of Co-Requisite, we have to have our radar on, with our students. We'd be very intuitive to what are they going through, what feels a little bit off, what was going on with somebody today when they didn't seem like they were really with us. And it takes instructors who have that kind of intuition and desire to help students in that way. We also focus on metacognitive reflection. I think at Butler, we do that really in all of our English courses. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit with AVID. And then connecting them to resources. I remember hearing this at a conference that we want to connect students to resources, but we want to connect them to people, not to offices. And so if I have someone who needs to go over to disability services, yes, I need to send them over there, but it's better to walk someone over and introduce them to that person, and especially for these students. And then finally, class discussions and writing assignments that allow for reflecting on their challenges and growth. So in my blended class right now for fundamentals, a lot of their short writing prompts have really been things that help them process how they're doing in school, what challenges they've faced, how they're growing, but they're writing essays. And at the same time, they're writing much more complicated, higher level essays in English 101, but they're getting practice in 060 by writing more about things that also help them process non-cognitive and affective issues. Okay, next slide, please. The reading cycle is something that we use at Butler. I also found this from Katie Hearn, California Acceleration Project. And so, it's just that idea of when you introduce readings in a class, they should, in my mind, always be connected to where you're going with the writing assignments. And so, again, so everything is connected. Students see that it's meaningful, that it's going to be used later on, and that we stay with that reading for quite a while. So we have before reading, and I'll just go through these steps pretty quickly because we'll do more with this in our next presentation. But before reading is where we're helping students preview and get background information about reading. And during reading is getting them trained to really actively read with annotating, being active with the text. After reading is discussion and journaling and moving up the levels of understanding, analyzing, evaluating, so moving up Bloom's taxonomy through that after reading discussion and journaling, any kind of things like that. That's, I think, the most fun. And then on to writing, where we use all that to move on to whatever that writing prompt is, and to continue to look back and see what did we get from the reading? What did our annotations show us? So And then we just started over again with another reading. So next slide, please. Butler is an AVID higher education institution. AVID stands for Advancement via Individual Determination. A lot of you may be aware of that in the middle schools and the high schools. My son actually teaches at North High in Wichita history. He teaches history, and North High is one of the beginning anchor schools for that in our area here. So ALP at Butler is very active in using critical thinking, inquiry, active learning, collaboration included, but of course, reading, writing, organization, helping them become better at their time management and their organization of the digital and physical things they have to organize to be good students, calendars, getting their homework schedule figured out. So that really undergirds a lot of what we're doing at Butler in ALP. Okay, and then one more slide. So at Butler, we have the community of practice, which I just oversee. It's simply that we, every semester, the instructors who are teaching ALP come together in a number of ways. We have large group get-togethers, sometimes face-to-face, sometimes Zoom, depending on what's happening in the world. But that's where we share what's going on in our sections and also help troubleshoot and then share and train each other. Also, we have small groups, so we break those down into small groups. So this semester, I have an online instructor small group, and I have a face-to-face instructor small group. And then Corey Tubner and I actually meet to talk about our blended. So that is huge, and it's just such a place to grow and to learn from each other and to encourage each other, because we all know you can feel like you're in the trenches. Well, you are in the trenches a lot of the time. So we have several lead instructors in our department, and they have stepped up to be mentors at times when we needed someone to mentor new faculty in ALP. We use a Canvas shared resources shell where we can all go to find lessons or just ideas, activities, documents. The incentive for doing this, that's a good question. I'll be sure to answer that, Janet. Thank you. So the incentives, when we were scaling up, we actually were able to have some funding for that. Our dean arranged that the faculty who went through the extensive training had a stipend that they received after not just doing the training, but producing like the syllabi that went with it. And, so they had to finish things. And that was really important. I think it helped us get started. Now we use, for incentive, professional development points for all those, which at Butler does add up to being able to, for adjuncts, get a stipend, and for full-time eventually to get a pay bump after so many professional development points. And something that's really exciting that I wanted to share is at a conference I went to in June, the CADE conference, which used to be called the ALP conference, so CADE. It's the kind of the Peter Adams conference that is now being led by people who followed him. I heard about embedded coaches in ALP classrooms. And now we've got some grant money that we're going to try at Butler in the spring. We're calling them ALP supplemental instructors, or ALPCs, someone said. And they are going to be coming into our classrooms at key times when the instructor would like additional support for students, maybe a workshop day or making your outline day, but also meeting with students one-on-one as like in a mentoring capacity. So very excited about that. So as far as how many sections we have, right now we have, I think this semester we have probably 7 sections. So you can see we started with all those sections in spring 2016. Of course, the world was different in 2016, and because of multiple measures or alternative measures, we don't have as many DEPID students. we don't have to have as many in our class, we don't have as many classes. So I think 7 in the fall and the spring is a pretty good amount of classes to have. Out of those, I think we might have more like 8 or 9 this semester. And then we have 4 online sections in the fall. That's really big in the fall. In the spring, it probably won't be quite as big. So, okay. I'm done with my slides. Do we want to go through any questions, or what should we do next, Casey?
Well, I think we're going to quickly get into an overview of implementation, not
Okay.
spend too much time on it. We want to get into our last L a little bit more. We're bringing up some great stuff, by the way. I saw another question about the embedded coaches and supplemental instruction. Are those are student positions, right, Kathy?
No, they're actually 28-hour professional positions.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we're
That's
just
awesome.
requiring a bachelor's degree for them, though.
Oh, great.
It'd be great if we get someone higher than that, but yeah, it's with a area, humanities or English area.
That's great. I know I've implemented embedded support at a couple of places and used both student staff as well as professional staff. So I'm happy to share resources with folks about that if they're interested. It looks like a question about the structure of the online out sections. Would you mind sharing that real quickly before we?
Sure. Yeah. So really, to build the online course, I just took my online English 101, which I had developed more over COVID. Like I think most of us are teaching more online now, and then found a way to scaffold the 060 with it. So, still thinking about like English 060 fundamentals would do something before they would do it in 101 and just keep going with that. I have backed off on the amount of volume in my 060 online because I found that they were getting overwhelmed with, even if you're staggering things, at some point they're going to be writing 2 essays at the same time. And it can be really overwhelming. So I've stretched out some of my short writings and added more practice building in there. And I think it's working better. And they seem happier. And, I'm still getting good results. So we get really good results in our online.
Awesome. Okay, so I went ahead and put into chat the handout that has implementation questions, resources, and references. So I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on this, but Sam, if we could get to our next slide. Thank you. We just included a whole lot of different questions. And even for those of you who are very experienced, maybe you'll find some resources in here useful. Things to think about in terms of student demographics. Placements, I know we've covered quite a bit. Course creation, faculty selection, assessment, systems issues. That's another thing I know can be really tricky, and I've worked at institutions with multiple systems, and so that's certainly a thing. And then how you're dealing with course spaces, scheduling, and then your institutional education and support. So one of the things that is linked in that document is a link to information for advisors, particularly because they are so important for spreading this information. So next slide, please. We also included some of our major English co-rec resource hubs. So ALP, the California Acceleration Project, Community College Research Center, NOS's resources on co-requisite lists. And then I found this co-requisite English professional development series that I particularly wanted to make sure that we highlighted because it includes hour-plus-long professional development on some of the key topics that I've found tend to be some of the hardest. So reading, like alternative grading approaches. That's something I have some experience with as well, is how you implement something like a specifications grading system, for instance. online. They have a whole section about teaching online, and a few different other things. So check out that video list in case you might find something useful in there. Next slide, please. I'll hand it back to Melanie.
Well, I think we want to make sure we have time for discussion and Q&A, but I'm going to put the link again to that shared document. And if you want to add anything under L, that would be awesome. Or I think if you have other questions that came up as we went through this information, please add that to the list. But I think we could go ahead and take some questions right now. So you can raise your hand or unmute, or maybe raise your hand. We've got what, almost 80 people on this Zoom. So maybe raise your hand or put a question in the chat and we will aim to answer those until 4 o'clock.
Melanie, would it help if I stopped sharing the screen? Maybe we could see each other better. Okay.
Great idea.
Thomas, thanks for the point about all the people we have at our institutions who can support us in this work. And I'm glad you mentioned OERs, because I did include links to OERs, as well as, I don't know if everyone's familiar with NROC's work, but they're doing some intriguing and interesting things. They have a whole fully packaged integrated reading and writing course that includes an OER with it as well. Lots of chat about embedded support. I love seeing that. That's a lot of my background. I'm a writing center person in addition to having a lot of community college background. And so I love the conversation around embedded support. It would be great maybe if we can share some more resources around that. And Faith, that's an interesting question. My guess, and I am not going to claim to know KBOR guidelines around this, but I do know HLC guidelines around this, that you're probably going to need someone with a degree in English for HLC accreditation guidelines. So.
Does that also include folks with a master's degree and at least 18 hours in the subject area of graduate work? Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Technically, by HLC guidelines, you can squeak by with a master's degree and 18 credit hours in English. So you could actually have your degree in something else, but have 18 graduate hours in English. I always advocate for some of that comp rep background because it is helpful for having some of that. But
a few people have already said this is what we're doing at our institution, but I think it would be helpful for us, at least me, if you are doing or piloting or trying out some of this at your institution, if you could post that in the chat, post the institution and what you all are are doing so we can kind of get a feel for what's going on around the state. Christopher, are you thinking we do that now or send that out?
Let's say send that out. That seems like something folks might want to take a little more time to be more specific than they can be in the chat.
That makes sense. Okay, we can totally do that. Thank you.
When we do that, we'll make sure we send out instructions via Sam, if that's okay, Sam. But we might also ask for any documents you might be willing to share that, because I know some of you all have probably very well documented journeys with implementation and changes, as well as perhaps materials for your trainings, and some all the different topics that we've been coming up with. So yeah, I noticed, Amy, the ELL specific section, I did that, implemented that when I was in Oregon and taught that and loved that. And I saw someone else mention, embedded tutor for the extra credit hour at Coffeyville, Melissa. I know we didn't talk through the different types of classes as much, but that is definitely a model that many institutions use. So that's studio model-esque, but there's some other variations of that. That's great.
Jen has a question.
Yeah, just real quick. As you guys know, we do not have a distribution list, and because of the number of people who attend, we are not creating a distribution list for this group. So I think what might be a better approach is for everyone to watch the KBOR subpage on English initiatives, and we can put a document there that everyone would be able to access via Google or facilitators, whatever platform you'd like to use. But instead of waiting for an email from Sam, let's direct everyone to that English subpage website, and that would contain anything that they need.
And maybe we can send the link to that out also when we send out our materials.
Yeah, I've already dropped it in the chat. I can go ahead and re-drop it in the chat so people don't have to search.
I'm wondering if it might be good for us to go ahead and throw up our spring events one more time for everyone. Oh, and Jen, Sam, the recording is going to be on the KBOR website, yeah?
Yes, it will, probably late next week. Is one of you guys pulling up the future sessions? Do you guys want me to do that?
Would you mind,
Not at all.
pretty please?
I'm gonna see how this works in the chat. It might not work. Ah, not too bad. We will get the registration link up for the January 31 session soon, but since it's fairly far away, so might not be until late next week as well. Thanks, Jen, for posting the link.
And I know one person had asked, you do need to sign up for each of those separately,
Yes.
just as an FYI.
Thank you. Yes, we would like folks to sign up for those like they did for this one. Right, we're only having the registration links for one session at a time. So after the January 31 session, we'll put up a registration link for the February 28 session. After the February 28 session, we'll put up the link for the April 4 session.
Sam, would you mind throwing up the slides one more time?
You
So
bet.
that has
Mhm.
that,
Oh,
just in case anyone wants to get any of those dates on your calendars ahead of time before the links are available. Or share that out with your fellow colleagues.
do you recall which slide it is, Casey?
It is our second
One
to
of the
the
last
left.
ones, Sam.
Okay, great, thank you. A little slow here, sorry guys.
As Jen noted, dates are also on the website. That's great. Thank you, Jen. Yeah.
So all the materials will be on the website, all the slides, the handout, the recording. And we will also create a shared document where folks can, we can get a list of what's going on at different institutions around the state. All right. Well, if there aren't any last questions, thank you everyone for participating. And and I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thanks,
And-
Casey, Melanie, and Kathy.
Yeah.
Thank you all
Thank you very
so
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank
Great
you.
conversations.